So now we'll consider programming exercise 6.8. This is found in the back of chapter 6. In this program, we want to convert between Celsius and Fahrenheit, and we want to write a class that's going to contain two methods. The first method is going to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and then the second method is going to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius. And so these methods are going to be, again, user-defined methods. They will go after the main method and before the end of the class, so they'll go within that class. And these methods, each of them are going to take in a single parameter of type double and then return a parameter of type double that's going to be the converted value. So for instance, Celsius to Fahrenheit will take in a parameter of type double that represents degrees Celsius, and it will return a double that represents the equivalent degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so let's get started. We want to write our test program. So our main method is going to be that test program. It's going to be that driver, right? And it's going to invoke these methods. We're going to display a table. This table is going to be similar to what we did back in chapter 5 on exercises 5.5 and 5.6. And so it's going to be a large table comprised of two smaller tables side by side, where we display the values from Celsius converted to Fahrenheit, starting with 40 degrees Celsius, then 39 degrees Celsius, 38. That should actually be down to 31. That wouldn't be very much of a table now, would it? So 40 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit, followed by 39, 38, 37, all the way down to 31 degrees Celsius converted to the Fahrenheit equivalent. And then next to that, side by side, will be a table that converts from Fahrenheit to Celsius, starting at Fahrenheit 120, decrementing by 10, so then 110, 100, 90, 80, etc. All right, so let's get to work. First thing we notice is there is no user input, and so there will be no need for the scanner to receive user input here. And so in our driver program, our main method, we want to go ahead and display this table, this large table. And so similar, again, back to programming exercises 5.5 and 5.6, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and print out the header for our table. I'm going to do that using a printf statement. If you remember, we used our printf statement so that everything would line up nicely. And so my first format specifier in this printf statement, I'm going to use a %-15 and S, because these are going to be my headers, right? Celsius, Fahrenheit, and then that bar that divides them, and then Fahrenheit, Celsius. So %-15S, and then a second %-15S. And then I'm going to put a %5S, and that's going to allow some space for that bar that's going to divide them, and then a %-15S to display Fahrenheit, followed by a %-15S to display the title Celsius. And then, of course, since this is my header for the table, I want to go to the next line after I print the header, so I need to put in that escape character for line feed, which is \n. All right, and now my arguments. So the first thing that I want to print out in that first format specifier is Celsius, followed by Fahrenheit, and then I want to print that bar, and I'm going to print Fahrenheit, and finally Celsius. Eclipse is trying to help me a little bit, so I need to get rid of that. All right. So that's my printf statement to print out just the header. And then under that, I want to print like an underline, if you will. I can use just a basic print line statement for this. Cut out that print line. And so I'm going to print 40 of these, actually 60, probably about 70 of these. I lost count. Just underline those. All right, and so now I need to initialize my Celsius and Fahrenheit variables, and that's going to represent where I start printing for this table. So I'll initialize one variable as this initial Celsius variable. And we said we were going to start Celsius at 40, and I'll initialize another variable, which is Fahrenheit, to 120. I have Celsius initialized to 40. I have Fahrenheit initialized to 120. And now I want to print out the contents of the table. So I'm going to do that in a for loop, right? Because I'm going to have each row, I'm going to print out one row at a time. And so I'll have I as my loop control variable, and I'll start I at 1. I'll say I less than equal to 10 because there are 10 rows in my table. And then I'm going to decrement Celsius. After each row, I decrement the value for Celsius. I decrement that by 1. I decrement the value for Fahrenheit by 10. And then finally, I'm going to increment I by 1 because that I is the counter for the row that I'm on. And so this will print out the 10 rows with Celsius starting at 40 degrees and decrementing by 1, which is exactly what I said I wanted to do up here in line 7. And then Fahrenheit was going to start at 120 degrees. And after each row, it's going to decrement Fahrenheit by 10. But I, again, is our row counter, and that's going to be incremented by 1. All right, so in this for loop, all I want to do in this for loop is print out that table, right? I want to print out the contents of the table. And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just grab this printf statement. I'm going to make some modifications, but that will save me from messing up all of my format specifiers because apparently I'm actually going to have just the similar format specifier widths. The type is going to change, however, because now instead of printing out strings, right, I'm going to be printing out floating point numbers. And so, or integers, if you will, or I'm sorry, doubles, if you will, which is a floating point number. So I'm going to give this a precision, a field width of 15 and a precision of 1. And because it's going to be a double, a floating point number, I'm going to have F as my format specifier type. Again, I'm going to keep the 5S for that bar for the spacing. But then again, this will be degrees Fahrenheit. So that's going to be floating point number, and degrees Celsius here will be also a floating point number. And that just allowed me to, again, I cut and paste it so that I had the number of the field width numbers correct. A little shortcut there. Okay, and so what I want to do is first I want to print out the degrees Celsius that we're converting from to the degrees Celsius, and then I want to print out the equivalent degrees Fahrenheit for that degrees Celsius. And so here I go. I'm going to call my method to do that. And I'm going to call that method Celsius Fahrenheit, and I'll pass it degrees Celsius. Now I still have to write that method. And then I'm going to print bar. I did my table header, and then I'll print Fahrenheit. That's going to be the degrees Fahrenheit. Then I have to convert it to Celsius. And so I'll call a method Fahrenheit to Celsius. Oops, I have to pass it Fahrenheit. And so I'll call the method Fahrenheit to Celsius to do just that. If I can spell it correctly, then it will get called F-A-R-E-N-H-E-I-T. Yes. I added an extra H in there for some reason. Okay, here we go. I think that looks right. Okay, so I still have to write these two methods, right? We still have these two methods to write: Celsius to Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit to Celsius. But in our driver program, if you will, this is what we have. So we'll print out the header for the table, and then we'll print out each row in the table. And each row will print out degrees Celsius, starting at 40 and decrementing by 1. And then it will print out the conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Then we'll print out the bar. We'll print out the degrees Fahrenheit, starting at 120, decrementing by 10. And finally, we'll convert that and print out the corresponding degrees Celsius. All right, so let's go ahead and start writing those methods. So the first method that we're going to write is Celsius to Fahrenheit. So public, static, and this method is going to return a double. It's going to take in degrees Celsius and it's going to do the conversion and then return the corresponding degrees in Fahrenheit. So that's going to be a double. And the name of our method Celsius to Fahrenheit, and it's going to take in a double value that I'll call Celsius. I want to put an H there so bad. Okay, and the only thing this method is going to do again is convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and we know the formula for that. And so I can actually put this right in the return statement. I can simply say return 9.0 divided by 5.0 times Celsius plus 32. That is the formula to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. We enter degrees Celsius, add 32, and then multiply by 9.0 divided by 5.0. And that gets returned. That is going to return a double. And so that's what will be printed in the print statement right here. And then the next method that we need to write, of course, is going to be the Fahrenheit to Celsius. So very similar. Public static double, because again, we're returning a double. Fahrenheit to Celsius is going to take in one parameter of type double. We'll call that Fahrenheit. And again, the only thing that this method is going to do is just do the computation and return the value. So we can do that in a single return statement. And that's going to be 5.0 divided by 9.0. And times Fahrenheit minus 32. And that is the end of our methods. All right, so again, our two methods that we wrote, our user-defined methods, Celsius to Fahrenheit, Fahrenheit to Celsius, occur or are placed in our program after the main method ends, which is on line 25, but within the class. So before we issue that end for that closing brace to end the class. All right, so here we go. And again, our printf statements, this is a review, of course, of our printf statements that we learned back in chapter 5. All right, so let's run this and see if our table looks reasonable or if we need to make any adjustments. Let's give us a little bit of room. All right, so a little spacing. We've got some little spacing things that are off here. So let's see how we can adjust that to make it better. Our spacing is off in our rows, right? Here. And so perhaps if we are to right justify this rather than left justify, right, maybe that will help us a little bit. So let's do that. Let's start playing with this a little bit. Let's right justify our Fahrenheit. Let's right justify our Celsius. And let's take off a few of these. There's just a bit too many of these. And let's just start investigating our spacing. And so again, a little bit better, but we probably need to space this over just a little bit. And we're getting there. And so there we have our table. We start with Celsius at degrees 40 and convert that to Fahrenheit, decrementing by 1 all the way down to 31 for 10 rows. And then likewise, we start at Fahrenheit 120 down to 30, so decrementing by 10 and converting to Celsius. All right, and so there you have it.